Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Top Voice Tuesday on March 11th, 2025. Shout out, it happens to be my anniversary to my amazing wife, so it's a special day for me, but also special because we've got Marc Fuentes with us, and we're going to have a great conversation about marketing and the marketing myth. Before I introduce Marc and give him a chance to say more about himself, just a couple shout outs about this podcast and what we've started in this LinkedIn Live series. We're here to talk about change, and we're here to talk about the amazing topics that this Top Voice community brings to the table. And it's been a great 2 months to get started. If you haven't been tuning in, you can see any past episodes on my YouTube channel, Michael J. Lopez 9, pretty easy to find. And we're going to be starting a newsletter off of this as well. So excited to have everyone tune in to the series. So let's jump in and let's talk about marketing. And yes, for those of you, Tim, good to see you. For those of you, please put in the chat where you're from, where you're dialing in from, and we love to take questions. Marc, why don't you tell us how we got connected and who you are and why you're in the space of marketing, and we'll dive right in.
Good afternoon and good morning, Mike. Thanks again for the opportunity and happy anniversary to you and your wife.
Thanks.
It's a pleasure to be here. I think we got connected probably over 6 months ago. I think part of the LinkedIn Top Voice, label that we're having on LinkedIn. Getting on Top Voice was something, it wasn't something I was striving for. It was just content I was writing around go-to-market, marketing, sales enablement, all things around go-to-market. And I think it popped into my inbox one day, hey, we think you are, prime target for LinkedIn Top Voice. So I accepted it. But it wasn't the mission or the actual objective. It was just writing content and sharing my stories on LinkedIn.
And that's just been a great, it's another example. It's the first question we ask everybody on the show, kind of how did you get the Top Voice moniker? And most of us didn't know we were on that path until it was bestowed upon us. But it's about repetition. It's about telling your story. We were talking before we signed in about this idea of telling stories, and really, really interesting to see that the consistency and repetition and having a voice in a particular area of expertise is really what it's all about. And I think only 4% of LinkedIn posts or users actually post. So it just goes to show you that even if you're active on the platform, you're kind of in the minority. And post more, post often, share your thoughts. The more, the better. But Marc, how did you get into the marketing world? Tell us a little bit about your marketing journey before we hit you with the big question and the provocative question that we want to talk about on this episode.
Yeah, it's going to date me a bit, but certainly over 2 decades of marketing, I think, like to say I came into the marketing world when things like SEO and coding websites with HTML was still a thing. And getting really into that space of digital marketing was now something that was becoming. But I spent time in brand marketing, brand activation, product marketing, product management, sales enablement, basically going across the entire gambit from discovering a suspect to bringing them in the franchise and servicing them all the way to keeping them as happy customers, happy members of the franchise. At an enterprise level, mid-market level, SMB level, startups have kind of played around in multiple different vectors of the go-to-market sort of businesses. When I wasn't doing that, I spent some time with smaller organizations who were trying to find their product market fit in the world of fractional. Some call it fractional CMO. I just call it fractional marketing, and really helping and guiding, leveraging that experience from the larger organizations, the processes to help those up and coming companies sort of find their footing and find their fit. So it's been an interesting sort of aspect to where I am today, which is back into the manufacturing sector with Eclipse Automation, which has been purchased by Accenture. And for those that don't know Eclipse, we do bespoke custom automation solutions for life sciences, medtech, automotive, consumer industrial, and into the new and growing nuclear market. So it's been a vast ride. I'm happy to be back in terms of the manufacturing sector, and certainly that industry is poised for tremendous change.
Absolutely. We both spent time in the nuclear world, so we share that in common, and it's a really, really amazing space. What's great about this is I'm not a marketer, so I have, as an entrepreneur in the last year and a half, I've probably learned more about marketing than at any point in the previous 30 years of my professional life. So I get to ask the simple, dumb questions. So, what are the biggest challenges that marketers face today? A lot has changed. What are the sort of top three things that marketers are struggling with in this current environment?
I think the first aspect of that, Mike, I would say they're struggling to create a narrative inside the organization of what marketing truly is supposed to be doing. Most folks internally will think marketing is about the promotion organization. Hey, I need a logo. I need to put this, slap this onto this poster. Go see the marketing team. But I think below that, marketing needs to continue to advocate for themselves that they're truly the helping to navigate and stir the four P's around product, pricing, promotion, and packaging and distribution, that particular element. And we don't talk enough about that anymore. We seem to see marketing as that promotion group. The second aspect, like I would say, is we certainly still live in a world where marketing and sales still need a lot of work to drive the alignment. Marketing needs sales, sales need marketing, but marketing's real job is to make the sales aspect easier, to make sure that when that salesperson show up at that particular ICP that's a fit for us, that that customer knows all they need to know about us in terms of our solutions, our tone, how we go to market, what use cases we solve. We're laying that groundwork for sales. And if marketing is not doing that, then we're not doing a huge fraction of our job. And I think the third piece when you think of marketing would be, how do we drive the ROI? Everyone's asking, where do you put that next dollar? How do you actually determine, is it an incremental spend or is it actual spend where you're going to be driving an impact? And I think ROI and attribution continues to be a discussion that aspects of in the C-suite need to be addressed, where there's certain things in marketing that could be measured and there's certain things that should be measured, but there's a whole aspect of marketing that just cannot be measured. But if you don't do it, there is an impact, and the impact is not great.
Yeah, it's interesting. Those are three just really great insights that I think we all take for granted. I mean, I worked for an agency, for a small boutique consulting firm before I started my own company, and they had a marketing and brand heritage. And I developed a deep appreciation for what you're describing. And yet, marketing is sort of always the first thing to get cut, right? In constrained times, that I think is such an interesting dynamic, right? And you just mentioned it at the end. When you don't do it, you feel the effects, but when you do it, you just take for granted that it's sort of running in the background. Why do we do that? Why is that such a reality for the marketing team that they're always the first to look for savings?
I think it's because it's viewed as an expense organization. It's viewed as an expense to the group, and in the past, feet on the street was more important. But as we've seen over the last 5 to 8 years, the buying group and the buying committee has changed so drastically again that no longer are salespeople showing up at your door with a credenza and saying, "Hey, Mike, here's what I got to sell you." We know that there was some research done by Sixth Sense that I think 70% of buyers have already selected 2 or 3 vendors they're going with before they even begin to embark on that research. So what it tells you is that, and then 80% of those same customers are the ones that's engaging sales. So it does say that how do you as a marketing organization begin to change the narrative of being not so seen as an expense, but as truly as a growth enabler by showcasing how buyers are buying and why you need to make these investments continuously and strategically, before buyers are entering the market. So I
Right.
think we need to change that narrative in the C-suite around expenses, around how companies buy, around how buyers educate themselves. How do they go about learning? I believe it was demand gen, and I'm going to say in this case JEN, coined the term learners. And if you're not actively looking to buy a solution in the market, You're deemed a learner, and you're learning about what's out there. How did others solve that problem? What use cases were they going after? How do they create a business case and appetite inside the organization? So I think going away from thinking of marketing as an expense and truly looking at it as a growth lever and a growth driver, I think it's up to the marketing team to continue to demonstrate that and educate, educate, educate. As much as we want to educate prospects, we have to do an even much more impactful job of educating the internal organization.
Yeah. So let's talk about it. You just used a phrase that I think is, I remember the first time I heard demand gen, and I had a client actually work on a client team, and they said, "Oh, I work in demand gen," and I was, those moments where you're in a meeting and everyone else knows the term but you don't, and I was like, okay, it just sort of took for granted that I was supposed to know what that was. So you used that phrase when we first met, and you used it just now, and you said something to me that was really impactful. That demand generation is a myth. That's why we're here in this conversation. Why do you say that?
I say that for a couple of reasons. And the first reason is there's a few that's been able to create demand. I think we can count them at times in different cycles in the market. So we know the brand Apple. Apple creates
Right.
them. They create that space. They create that sort of will in you to go out there and get that next product. But what most folks fail to forget is that Apple has been creating that demand for decades now and creating that brand, creating those memorable experiences that when you are in the market looking for that particular product, that is your top brand you go to. But for many other brands in the B2B space, creating demand is not something that you can actually do. Like put your shingle out there, start to market to people and say, you know what, I'm going to be able to generate 10% of demand on that particular product. It does not happen. It's just not it's a fallacy we've been led to believe, and I think we need to start course correcting it because it also improves the next generation of marketers that's coming up and the current generation in marketing to understand the idea of growth marketing and demand generation and demand creation is not something you can do, but it's a byproduct of really good brand marketing. And I
Mm.
think it's really two sides of the bell curve. And I think folks who have been spending that time in that particular world for the last 10, 15 years will talk about demand gen. We'll talk about, growth marketing to the extent that, marketers can really grow a particular market and really outgrow it. And I think it is so impactful for people to understand that you cannot bring a customer to buy your solution, but you can help them learn about your solution, educate them about the solution. And I'm going to go into another topic in a second. When they are in that buying mode, as we call them in marketing, that your brand is memorable. It triggers that memory to say, that's the brand that's been educating me about this particular use case, this solution, other elements of bringing that through my enterprise and my mid-market organization. So I think that's the myth, and we really need to, settle it and really get to a point where there are brands that can create demand. Don't get me wrong. Gong was another one in B2B, right time, right space that really created demand. And I think it's really an aspect of that. There's also Zoom that really took off during the pandemic that created demand again, but it was a market challenge that really took that off. If that didn't happen, the premise of working from home and the premise of remote work wouldn't have actually taken off the way it has. So I'm a firm believer is that we don't create demand, but we need to create the experiences through brand marketing that drives for those who are in market to actually purchase and select your product as one of the products they want to engage with.
Yeah. So that's a big statement. So for anyone who's in the demand gen job, I hope Mark didn't make you feel bad. That's not the goal. The goal is to think about what are we doing and where are we spending our time, right? So I'm out here in the world of change and transformation, and I compete with Accenture. I compete with the companies I used to work for. What makes me special, and why would someone go with Michael Lopez instead of a bigger organization? And there's a great question in here, and I want to pick at this more because I think it really does have broad implications for where we spend our time, how we think about where we spend our time, and the question that you raised of where do we put our money, right? And I think that's the biggest conversation that most executives want to learn about. There's a question in the chat here for those who can't see it. is Mark making a distinction, as in a difference between demand gen and lead gen? Can you share a little bit about that, Mark? Are you making that distinction?
Yeah, and I'm going to make that distinction from a concept that's called the 95-5 rule. And it was basically from Professor John Dodds out of the Ehrenberg Bass Institute. And the model says that at any given point in time, only 5% of your ICP, your ideal customer fit, is in market in a buying mode. 95% of that market is not in a buying mode. 95% of that market probably don't even know they need a solution, haven't even quantified yet what is happening in their organization to be able to go and create a business case to begin researching what's possible, what's feasible out there. So when someone talks about demand gen and lead gen, demand gen is supposed to be really taking a large chunk of your budget and really educating the market. So when that 95% enters the market as that 5%, the fraction of that, you have created an experience, you have created the conversation, you have taught them how to select a solution, you've taught them what to look around the corner, what blind spots to consider, how you business cases with your buying group, so that you're going to be one of the brands they select when they enter that market. And we know that most folks only enter that particular market with 3 or 4 brands. So it's really up to that organization in how they look at lead gen and demand gen, where they spend the money. And for the last 10 years, the majority of money was being spent around the 5% of folks who were in market. And the 95% who was not in market yet was being, in 2 ways, they were being left out. Or if you were speaking to them, you weren't speaking to them as an organization that wanted to teach them or educate them or help them learn about what was happening. It was more like, let's sell you now, let's bring you in, let's demo you, let's move you through the pipeline. And that really created, to me, another element of what I would say also as well, that really hurt the model that's around the BDR model, which is the business development model.
Yeah.
So 95-5 is really the rule, and more organizations really understand that rule now that we have more data, now that we have more valuable insights, is how to take that marketing budget and spend that across those 2 parameters.
So I think this is great, and I'm gonna use an analogy here. There's a bit of a what I hear you saying is there's a bit of a if you build it, they will come kind of model, right? Which is this idea that if I'm clear about who I am and what I do, I being the company or organization or business, and I'm clear about the problem I solve, and I'm clear about why you'd want to go with me, that I need to be available to capture the demand that sort of floats by my ecosystem. It's like that fish that holds the little dangling thing in front of its face, and another fish swims by and it sort of grabs it. But you're introducing a tension point, I think, in sort of this myth conversation. It feels a bit passive in some ways. Some people might say, well, we just need to be available for when that 5% comes by. And yet most marketing is about, this is what I hear, right? Okay, well, if you want to make $1 million in sales, then you have to have, so many customers, which means you have to do so many outreaches, which means you have to do so many qualifying calls and all that sort of stuff, right? And we're taught about the funnel. Go work the funnel. But I think you're describing something different. How do we reconcile that?
Well, I think there's a fallacy out there that there is truly a funnel in the way people buy stuff. There's a
Oh,
linear way people buy stuff. And I don't think that's the way people buy stuff. I think emerging from that, there was an element of really dark social that people talked about. And dark social, the reason why it was called dark social is because marketing systems and tracking systems could not track a person doing their own research because there was no attribution model. So typically they would go into communities, they would go into analysts and speak with them, they would speak to their peers. Those conversations cannot and are not being tracked in any marketing automation system or CRM system. So that's what we refer to as dark social. That it was happening, these conversations happening, and they're basically driving the prospect to become much more familiar with 1 or 2 brands and to actually infuse their thinking in terms of who they choose. I think the other concept that's around that particular piece is that you want to be able to have moments of truth when that person are in the 5%. And most people say, well, it's really passive. But the idea is that at any given point in time, in any year, you only have 20% of the market in a buying mode. So the whole idea is why always be competing with that 20%? Because you're coming down to pricing, you're coming down to many different elements that, competing on feature sets and which features you have, which features the
Right.
competitor don't have, rather than trying to educate a market on how to buy. So when they do enter, if it's through RFPs, you're actually helping them create the RFP. If it's through their regular mode, you're seen as the brand that's helped taught them and teach them how to actually buy those pieces. So I think that's where the passiveness come into it. Some people might think, but the other option is if you don't do that, you're constantly going to be competing at the bottom end of that 5%. And the other thing that's really interesting, though, Mike, that most people don't take into account, when capital was cheap, as we sort of eased off from the 2008 crisis, every person who had some sort of an idea in the SaaS world, let's say for example, was basically getting the funding to create a product. So you look at categories right now, and they're bloated. There's so many choices within a category, and pretty much they're all saying the same thing. A couple of different AI words here. We do AI, we do innovation, we do this, but you can hide a bunch of logos in various categories and you would not know which brand is which again goes back to the point. If you're not investing in brand marketing and not investing in that 95%, you're constantly competing at the end on features, on price, on elements that you cannot really control or help make the buyer choose the right solution for their business.
It's such a great insight about competing on features, right? So in the world of change, I'll tell a little story. I recall working and I've worked in two of the big four companies, and part of I left one and went to another, and we were in the middle of a competition, and they sort of asked me, hey, can you, with your insight from the previous company, can you tell us a little bit about how we're positioned in the next um, RFP? And all good stuff, good solutions, good ideas, but those two solutions were virtually indistinguishable from each other, at least in the area of change where I was working. And that's partly why I started my own thing, was to do things differently. But we were saying the same things, right? We have the better mousetrap. We have the more efficient process. We have the faster outcomes. We have the less expensive solution, whatever it may be. And why do we do that? Why do we compete on feature sets, and why do we compete on kind of this idea of solution selling? Why does that happen? Is there something about making us feel better that we've invested all this time in our widget that is part of what's driving that? Because what I hear you saying is it doesn't make a difference, right? Because the buyers already come with a certain orientation based on what they know about you in advance of ever having that conversation.
Yeah, I think it comes down to really two things. I think sometimes you get pulled into that feature comparison bake off, and you don't have a choice again because you're competing with that 5% of the market all the time. So you're down there, trying to kind of bake off on features and pricing most of the times. The second piece is, there's just an aspect of lack of proper, I would say, sales enablement and training. I've seen for probably over the last 10 to 15 years that as an investment line in GTM organizations have just gone away.
Mm.
Whether you're training people on the challenger sale or the third box sale or one of these different formats we have, the medic format. I think that lack of training and that lack of investment has gone away. So salespeople are left to their own realms to come up with how to actually have those conversations. And I think the whole idea of solution selling and being able to help that organization make better decisions have gone away because we haven't invested enough in that business development model and the sales model. So that's one aspect, I think, why we end up into feature comparison price bake-offs that we have been, getting into for the last little while. I also think that, from a category perspective, when I actually go back with access to capital, categories have ballooned, and they've ballooned really in areas where they have lacked, the market evaluation. They've lacked product market fit. They have lacked the value proposition to enter those markets. They've lacked the go-to-market model. But you know what? Over the last 10 years, cheap capital have covered that stuff for a lot of organizations. But I don't think that cover can stay here anymore. That cover has been blown off. And we're now getting back to fundamentals in marketing that were once seen as, we're going to bypass that because we don't do that. We need to go faster here. And I think sometimes you need to go slow to go fast. And
Yeah.
it's really important on the marketing side where things like segmentation is coming back to be a sexy word in marketing again. Speaking to customers, not just once and don't speak to them for 3 years, is coming back as another sexy thing to do again. Speak to customers, understand what are they saying, how are they saying it, understanding how they buy, what they buy. Those type of things are coming back again. Being able to look at your value proposition through the eyes of your competitor, the market, and the use cases and the problems, and really formulate around those areas. How are you different? What are you truly bringing to the market? So messaging, positioning is starting to have another priority amongst marketing folks again. And I think as we continue to really push those narratives back into the marketing world, that you need to have these things really well laid out, your pricing approach, where you fit in the market. You can't be premium pricing if you don't offer a premium product or service. So
Right.
understanding where you are in the marketing, where you are in the market, and where you're pricing your product to the value you're driving, aligning those, because not every company needs to be premium, not every company needs to
Yeah.
be value. And so it goes back to segmentation and truly understanding where you fit in that market and evoking that market strategy around that and telling that strategy internally and externally and focusing the marketing dollars into those segments. You have done the research and you could win it. I think those are the things that are going to really make the difference to marketing teams, in 2025 and beyond.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's if this is like a master class in how to build a modern day marketing organization. So if you're taking notes, you've gotten a lot of wisdom here. And Tim Teen is on the watching. He put something in the chat, and he and I talked a couple weeks ago about the cost of capital and why that has shifted the game in terms of the choices that we make. And his point of view was that a lot of boards don't even know how to respond to understanding where to go generate the investment dollars that they need. And what you're describing is what's the business case for deploying that into marketing. And I hear so many great thinking about language, just listening to what you're describing and putting it in the context of change, right? This idea of moving from the funnel oriented linear buying experience to more around a bit of a net, and casting a net around educating potential buyers on why we're different, building a relationship, cultivating awareness. It's this more long-term approach, and I think so much of what we hear is go get it now, right? Go drive sales now, go find in the funnel the people that are ready to buy now, move them from stage to stage. And I think what you're really presenting to everyone is a shift of thinking about the value of marketing as a long-term organization that supports strategy by telling stories in the marketplace about why people should come find us and build a relationship with us, which is just a really huge transformation of what kind of modern day marketing has been led to believe they're supposed to do.
Yeah, and I mean, I know folks are going to say, well, I'm in a lead gen role, I'm in a demand gen role. Mark, you're deprecating those roles, and it's not deprecating the roles, and they say, but having those roles rethink areas of how they can drive impact, how you can truly drive um, uh, change the conversation around demand generation to maybe demand learners, how you create learners in your side, learners with the ICP you want to go after. And in lead gen, if you've discovered the 5% that's in market ready to buy, then you use your lead gen set of tools to help that particular person move through. And it's not a typical funnel of top of the funnel, middle of the funnel, bottom of the funnel. No, you're moving with the way that buyer needs to buy, and not every buyer is going to buy the same way. And we can't force them down the funnel that way or force them down the funnel this way. It's how they're going to buy. It's one of those things that we just need to fundamentally change, but it's not a fact of let's go get rid of all our lead gen people and our demand gen people. No, it's really helping those people in the organization rethink how they go to market. I think it's really, really important.
I love that phrase. Rethinking is really what this is all about, and this is one of the reasons we have these conversations is to help people rethink, what you know about the role you're in and how you're supporting the organization. And I see a great chat in here. Someone said you should change your name to marketing with a hyphen and a ETING since you're kind of the guru here. But we're arriving at the end, and Mark, I want to give you the floor before we depart. But as people know, we always do a little bonus question here, and this was left from our last guest to you, and would love to really get your perspective on this. A bit of a shift. Who is the most talented person you've ever met, and why?
Um, it's someone that I met very early in my career, and who provided the opportunity for me to really stretch my mind. It was my second job out of school. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us today.
Mm,
But this was back in 2001, and I think I look back at 24 years later. He still has that imprint kind of on me in terms of how I operate in my day-to-day world. And you never really realize some of the people you meet in your career. Some of them are teaching you. Some of them are teaching you great stuff, not so great stuff. But I think he was really one of those folks that had a real impact on me and still has today.
that's great. That's great. And it sounds like he helped you shift and rethink, and that's been the theme of this conversation, right? Rethinking our approach to anything. The more you can challenge your beliefs, the more you can challenge your assumptions, not just do it the way it's always been done. And you've, Mark, just delivered a ton of value in this conversation about those in the marketing world and beyond. We could probably keep going, but I want to make sure we wrap up in the appropriate amount of time. Mark, is there anything you want to leave the listeners or watchers with? Anything that they can do to reach out to you, or anything you want them to check out before we go?
Yeah, thanks for that opportunity, Mike. I would say I'll probably leave them with 2 points. That I'm a firm believer that it's probably best to be first to mind and first to market, especially in the marketing world. Probably across the LinkedIn community, you guys have heard of a gentleman named Dale Harrison. And something he said was really profound recently, that people look at brand marketing as something that really, you know, you should, it's not one of those short-term investments. But Dale Harrison made it to the point that says brand marketing doesn't take longer to work, but it works longer for you. And I think that's profound in how marketers should think of brand marketing, that you can always measure your performance marketing, but brand marketing is something that it doesn't take longer to work, but it also works longer for you. And I think that's really a concept that's been sitting with me lately in terms of, how do I, within my teams, how do I, evoke that type of thinking as we go through various aspects of, rebuilding, retooling the Eclipse automation front end of the business. For folks who want to connect, certainly happy to connect. Always happy to share some thoughts. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to jump on various conversations, etc. Mike, in closing, this was really, really special. I thank you again. For those that haven't really had a chance to check out Mike's background, please do. Most importantly, Change, which is a book Mike has recently launched in the marketplace. I think it's one of those cool aspects of where we are in society today, both professionally and personally. It's one of those areas in those books that can probably have another profound impact of how you think about change. It's not always the phrase and the parable we use, but it's probably something that a necessity to get to realizing a next version of ourselves. So, Mike, thanks again, and certainly looking forward to much more conversations with you.
I appreciate that. I didn't pay him to make that advertisement. So, I think to summarize, this is really marketing is now the behavior change arm of the organization, and I think that's what you've helped us link these things together. So, to go watch previous episodes, please go to YouTube and subscribe there. It's great. Michael J. Lopez 9. Thank you again, Mark, for everything. It's been a great conversation, and we'll see everybody next time.
Enjoy anniversary, Mike. See you later.